Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silver's special report.
Okay, so I typically give y'all one fantastic episode per week, but so much has gone on in the sports world this week that I gotta talk about it with somebody. So I have a college football national championship preview show with friend of the show, Brett Gosnell, coming out as well, but I can't leave you hanging on this story because it's just too interesting. Believe it or not, we're talking U.S. men's national team soccer. Now, if you're a super casual fan like I am, someone who only pays attention when they're in the World Cup, you might think you have 4 years till you have to lock back in again. But they're out here trying to compete with the NBA in terms of drama. On the field, their World Cup performance was lackluster. They made it out of the group stage after not even qualifying for the previous World Cup, so that's something, but they played a relatively uninspired brand of soccer that lacked creativity and aggressiveness, particularly when it came to scoring. Now, a big reason for this blah effort was their coach, Greg Berhalter. He implemented their playing style and he made curious lineup decisions, such as not playing young phenom Gio Reyna a lot. And Reyna is a player who is everything this team as a whole isn't, specifically creative and looking to score. This was especially odd since Berhalter's contract was up after the World Cup, so he was essentially coaching for his job. If I were coaching for my job, I'd certainly play my best players, but hey, what do I know? I'm just a sports genius. Berhalter received a ton of criticism during the World Cup, particularly for not playing Reyna, and almost immediately after the US was eliminated, in what I am sure is a total coincidence, reports started coming out justifying his decision not to do so. Apparently, Gio was half-assing it during training sessions leading up to the World Cup, so Berhalter benched him for the opening match against Wales, and then after being benched, Reyna was half-assing it even more, at times quarter-assing it, to the point that teammates had to intervene, and Reyna eventually apologized to the team for his behavior. This isn't particularly noteworthy, honestly. I mean, Gio is young and super talented. This was probably the first time in his life he had been benched. He handled it poorly, but the team's veterans handled it in-house, and you would hope it'd be a learning experience for him moving forward and nothing more. I mean, he's 20 years old. The average 20-year-old is going to handle some things immaturely. They're 20. I imagine this happens a lot in all sports, and we just never hear about it. Now, where things get interesting is how we heard about it this time. Our boy Greg Berhalter was speaking at the HOW Institute for Society Summit on moral leadership, which is funny, after coming back home, and he said, quote, "In this last World Cup, we had a player that was clearly not meeting expectations on and off the field, one of 26 players, so it stood out. As a staff, we sat together for hours deliberating what we were going to do with this player. We were ready to book a plane ticket home. That's how extreme it was. And what it came down to was we're going to have one more conversation with him, and part of the conversation was how we're going to behave from here out. There aren't going to be any more infractions." Now, it didn't take a sports genius such as myself to figure out who he was referencing, since there was only really one glaring example of someone who hadn't been playing as much as they should have without a reasonable explanation. More and more reports started coming out about the team taking a vote on whether or not he should be sent home and all this other stuff, to the point that Gio's agent, Dan Siegel, had to issue a statement to The Athletic, who did a ton of reporting on this, saying, quote, "Gio obviously did not have the experience anyone hoped for at the World Cup. The situation, relationships, and interactions among parties are far more complicated than what has been reported. It is disappointing and disrespectful for certain parties to be commenting on private team matters publicly, especially when some do so without full knowledge of the facts and others do so in a self-serving manner. At this point, our view is that nothing more is gained by those associated with the national team turning on each other, and we plan no further comment on this matter." Which to me sounds a whole lot like, yeah, Gio messed up, but Greg is only doing this publicly to save his own ass. And Gio himself released a statement on Instagram where he admitted he'd let his emotions get the best of him after learning that he wouldn't be getting as much playing time as he thought, but he also mentioned being disappointed in Berhalter that he made this all public. Fast forward to this week. For some reason, U.S. Soccer is still negotiating with Greg about a new contract when, as I said, it's time to move on. And basically out of nowhere, Berhalter releases a statement on Twitter explaining that someone is essentially trying to blackmail him, so he wanted to get out ahead of it and explain himself. He then went on to explain that in 1991, when he was 18, there was an incident in which he was drunk and arguing with his then girlfriend, and he kicked her in the legs. He goes on to further explain how immediately he took responsibility, sought counseling, and all this stuff. He ended up marrying that girlfriend. They've been married ever since, and they raised a family and all that fun stuff. Without knowing him or what their marriage looks like behind the scenes, that's a very good statement and a great example of how to come back from something terrible you did. I wouldn't even factor it into the decision about whether or not to renew his contract. By all accounts, it appears to be an isolated incident from over 30 years ago. It never seems to have happened again, and he seems to have grown from it, so good for him. But who would leak this? Who would contact U.S. Soccer and tell them they had information that would take Greg down? and for it to be such private information that only a handful of people would know. Turns out it was Gio Reyna's mom, Danielle. Hot damn. She said in a statement, quote, "I thought it was especially unfair that Gio, who had apologized for acting immaturely about his playing time, was still being dragged through the mud when Greg had asked for and received forgiveness for doing something so much worse at the same age." Well, alright then, but how in the hell would Danielle even know about this incident between Greg and his now wife? That's where this gets really nuts for me. Turns out she was best friends and college soccer teammates with Greg's now wife, Rosalind. But wait, there's more. Danielle's husband, who is Gio's father, is none other than former U.S. national team player Claudio Reyna, and Claudio grew up playing youth, high school, college, and eventually U.S. national team soccer with Greg Berhalter. As we already discussed, Greg ended up marrying Rosalind, and who was Greg's best man? Claudio Reyna. Now, is this World Cup where this decades-long friendship ended? I thought so, but Claudio is the sporting director of the MLS's Austin FC. He has been since 2019. In 2021, the team made the decision not to pick up the option on the contract for a player by the name of Sebastian Berhalter. That's right, Greg and Rosalind's son. So did Greg decide not to play Claudio's son Gio as much during this World Cup as payback for Claudio not keeping Sebastian on his team? I don't know, but I choose to believe it to be true. Now, Danielle Reyna allegedly blackmailing Greg, or whatever you want to call it, is certainly next level stuff. I mean, get a grip. But Claudio was blowing up U.S. Soccer's phones and inboxes before the World Cup was even over to complain about his son's lack of playing time, and that is incredibly on brand for soccer parents in America. Before I was the sports media superstar you know and love today, I worked in recreational sports. And one of the worst parts of the job was dealing with parents, and soccer parents were especially awful. Soccer was the only sport where I had to routinely eject parents and coaches from the premises for showing their quarter, half, and whole asses. And it's not even like we're talking super high-level youth sports, just what you'd sign your kid up for to see if they like soccer. But these adults were ridiculous. I've gotten mad about a lot of stupid things in my life, however, I cannot wrap my head around being filled with rage at the result of a 10-year-old soccer game. These kids didn't even care that much, and they were the ones playing. They'd be on the bench with their fidget spinners or whatever while their dad is cursing out the referee who's just trying to make $30 on a Saturday morning. To this day, I don't understand it. I can understand excitement or joy or even disappointment, but pure rage to the point that my underpaid ass has to ask you to go sit in your car? What are we doing here? But apparently, I'm the one who's wrong here, because if you want your kid to make it to the U.S. men's national team, then you need to never give up that attitude of entitlement and petulance. So if I kicked you off the soccer field at West Ashley Park, I apologize for standing in your child's path to greatness. Now, as I mentioned, I love drama, so this is one way to keep me interested in U.S. men's soccer, at least until we convince Kylian Mbappe to become a citizen or try to score goals on our own. So I was excited to learn that the U.S. men's national team is no stranger to drama. In the 1998 Men's World Cup, they had an even more lackluster performance than the one we just saw. It was a flat-out disappointment that included an upset loss to Iran, which we almost pulled off again this year. And a big reason for that bad performance, much like this year, was the curious decision-making of the coach Steve Sampson. In particular, Sampson left U.S. team captain and one of the best players we had at the time, John Harkes, off the roster, which shocked the hell out of everybody. Sampson said the decision to leave Harkes off the roster was due to technical and leadership reasons, but didn't provide any further explanation, and we had to wait years later to find out what really went down. Sampson resigned after that World Cup, and that was that. Off the field, it would appear Steve Sampson is the exact opposite of Greg Berhalter. He never leaked the full story, and we found out what really happened from Eric Winalda, who played on that 98 World Cup team. Apparently, John Harkes was left off that team because he had been sleeping with Winalda's wife. What a true scumbag move. So Sampson left him off the roster, didn't tell anybody what happened, even despite Winalda telling him he'd be okay with Harkes being on the roster because it helped them win, which is a level of selflessness I hope to never achieve. But good for Eric Winalda. And honestly, it kind of makes sense, because you know what's worse than your teammate banging your wife? Playing on a losing team after your teammate banged your wife. It's not like his wife was going to be unbanged. Once banged, you're banged. Trust me, I know. But it might be easier to deal with if you had a deep World Cup run. Alas, Sampson disagreed, so they finished last in their group, and Winalda's wife remained banged. So I do appreciate the men's national team trying to give us something to be interested in while they try to develop an entertaining on-the-field product. I would remove the domestic violence and sex scandals for something a little bit less salacious, but definitely keep giving us the drama. And also get rid of Berhalter. He stinks. I'm interested to see how Reyna's teammates deal with this. Will they be more like Eric Winalda, or is this soccer helicopter parenting too much? Personally, between this and how he acted at the World Cup, I would certainly lose some respect for him as a teammate. But I guess time will tell. In the meantime, thank you for watching and listening to this bonus episode of Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers. There is more Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers content coming soon in the form of the College Football National Championship Game Preview Show. So I'll see you then.